Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the history of Magic the Gathering with Apocalypse. Apocalypse being the third set, the last small expansion in the Invasion block. So Apocalypse was released on June 4th of 2001, and it had 143 black bordered cards. It had the themes of Disciplines, Envoys, Flag Bearers, Sanctuaries, Siphon Creatures, Split Cards, and Revolvers. And it continued with the theme of Kicker that had also been in previous expansions in this block. The set symbol was to represent the mask of Yawgmoth. Now, like the previous sets, it had a big multicolor focus, but unlike the other ones where it was focused on ally colors, this focused on enemy colors being in the same multicolored card. In the same retrospect, it expanded Kicker once again to include using enemy lands and enemy colors as part of Kicker costs. Now, the storyline had, of course, the coalition forces throwing themselves against the stronghold from Wrath, now overlaid in Urborg. In the meantime, Gerald took a team of planeswalkers and dove deep into Phyrexian in order to attempt to defeat Yawgmoth. Eventually, though, he was captured along with Gerald, and the two of them were forced to fight to the death within an arena deep within Phyrexia. Gerald beheaded Urza, theoretically killing him, but then he grabbed the head and managed to escape and leave Phyrexia. He found himself in the throne room of Krovax and had to deal with him. In the meantime, the rest of the Leatherlight crew was looking to ways to activate the legacy, effectively to use the Null Moon, Dominaria's artificial moon, charged with white mana in order to defeat Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth, though, chasing Gerald, came upon Dominaria as some kind of horrible black cloud of death. He entered into the land. Eventually, though, Gerald found a way to awaken the legacy weapon by giving an artifact that was in Urza's possession, effectively keeping what remained of him alive, to Karn, and using then Karn to channel the energies. They activated the legacy weapon, the legacy, and defeated Yawgmoth. In the ensuing attack, Gerald and Urza, though, finally passed away. They both died. Now, it had a 15-card booster pack with an Evolver on it. It had, of course, 4 pre-constructed theme decks, and it had a Fat Pack. It's important to note that the Fat Pack included the modern symbol set spinner spin down, that version of it that we see nowadays for spin downs. Now, it had a pre-release on May 26th of 2001, in which the pre-release card that you would get for competing was, of course, the Fungal Shambler in Sanskrit, which I may note, I have a number of from that event. Now, it also did include a novel of the same name. A 1/1 Goblin Soldier token was released along with here as the Magic Player's Reward, so it was another token let out with this. Now, as I said, Kicker was continued and evolved, but this set also saw effective vertical cycles in each of the separate colors. Red had Bloodfire. Bloodfire creatures had an activated ability where effectively you could pay red mana, sacrifice them to have some kind of damaging effects to creatures and possibly players, depending on where it is in the vertical scale of Bloodfire creatures. White had Flag Bearers. Flag Bearers effectively, when you had one out in play, when an opponent played a spell or effect that could target something of yours, it had to target the Flag Bearer first. If multiple Flag Bearers were out, the opponent playing the effect or spell could choose which one to affect with that spell. Green saw Penumbra, which it was a green creature that when it would be put into the graveyard from play, you would put a black creature, a black token with the same power and toughness of it into play to effectively replace it. Black had the Siphon effect, which effectively when a creature would come into play, these were traditionally some kind of Phyrexian creature, you had to pay an amount of life, but then you drew cards in replace of it. So effectively it siphoned off life from you, but you got cards to replace it. Blue, of course, had Whirlpool. Effect with a Whirlpool is when it would come into play, you would shuffle the cards from your hand into your library, and then afterwards draw as many cards as you originally had in your hand. So you basically Whirlpool, shuffle out your hand with that. Now, beyond these vertical cycles, there were 10 actual cycles within this set. It had the Disciplines. The Disciplines were a creature of each color that had activated abilities that cost each one of the enemy color to get an effect. So if you had a green creature, it would have a blue effect you could pay mana for, and a black effect you could pay mana for. Play blue, tap it, do an effect. Play black, tap it, do an effect. That's effectively what the disciplines were. It had enemy color pain lands. You could tap them for a colorless or tap them for a pair of enemy colors and take hit damage. So it was enemy color pain lands. It had enemy color split cards. So it was a split card like we had before, but each of the two splitted spells was of a different enemy color. So you'd have a red and white combination of two spells that could be used together. Enemy color 2 drops, effectively a gold card that cost one of each of 2 mana. That were enemy colors. The big thing that united amongst these two is as you kind of went through the cycle of them, their creature types matched. So it would have 2 creature types and it would match one on one side, one on the other, and effectively you could cycle through the creature types in these. Very interesting little tidbit about them. It is a cycle of enemy color non-creature spells, effectively spells that were not creature spells that had enemy colors. A cycle of enemy color permanents, so these were creatures, enchantments, whatever, but they were of enemy colors and very similar mana cost also, and had a cycle of envoys. Now, these are the envoys I briefly talked about earlier as a mechanic here. Effectively, whenever it came into play, whatever creature type it was, you would then reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and if there was a card in amongst them, or cards in amongst them that matched the creature type of the type you played, you put them into your hand. So if I played an elf creature, I'd look at my top cards, any elves in it would be put into my hand, the rest would be put on the bottom of your library in any order. There was the sanctuaries, enchantments that had basically no effect on their own. But when you would have a permanent of one of its enemy colors, it would gain an effect. If you had a permanent of both of its enemy colors, it would gain a greater effect. So effectively, you would want a set of 3 colors in a deck where you were using one of these, that you would have the sanctuary out, and if you had both of the enemy colors in permanent form out in play, you would gain the maximum effect of the sanctuary. It had a cycle of wedge spells. What the wedge spells were, it was a combination of 2 colors that were allied colors, and then it had a 3rd color that was the enemy color of both of those colors. So that's how you figured out what the wedge was. You looked at 2 allied colors, you looked at what enemy was both of their enemies, and those were the 3 colors of these spells, and it had a cycle of them that you could play. And finally, it had a cycle of Volvers. The Volvers were creatures that had 2 kicker costs, that each of the kicker costs involved one of the enemy colors to whatever color the Volver was. Again, similar, if you had green, it would be blue and black kickers. When you played the kickers, they would boost up the Volver's power and also give it a special ability, usually related to whatever color it was. So if you were doing some kind of blue kicker, traditionally it'd be flyer, maybe black would give it regeneration. Now, it did have 1 pair of cards, Desolation Angel and Desolation Giant. Both of these had a kicker of the enemy color white, of 2 white, that would have an effect. They would have Armageddon as an effect and Wrath of God as effect if you paid the kicker, respectively. Now, the pre-constructed decks were Burial, a white-black-green deck, Pandemonium, a rainbow deck, that means all 5 colors, Swoop, a blue-green deck, and Whirlpool, a blue-red deck. Now let's talk about cards that you might want to know about from the set. First is Vindicate. Destroy target permanent. It's as simple as that. It's pretty cheap. You destroy a permanent, white-black, it's good. Pernicious Dead. It's actually an enchantment. You had X and tap it, and you would sacrifice it, and all artifacts, enchantments, and creatures of converted mana cost of X or less were destroyed. So you could get rid of a lot of things from the board, and maybe if you have some very high casting cost things, keep them out. There was Mystic Snake. It is a 2/2 snake with flash. The big thing about it with is, when you played it, you countered a spell. So it was a flashing, you countered a spell by playing a snake monster. It was pretty good. Now, Spiritmonger was a 6/6 that whenever it dealt damage to a creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on Spiritmonger. For black, you regenerated it, and for green, you could change it to the color of choice until end of turn. There was Goblin Ringleader. It was the Goblin Envoy. When you played it, you looked at the top 4 cards of your library, put any goblin cards into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library. It was also a haste creature, so it was actually not bad because you could throw it out, attack with it, and still get a bunch of goblin cards into your hand. Fire and Ice. This split card is actually one of the better one of the split cards. Fire, you do 2 damage to your choice of up to 2 creatures, split the way you wanted to. And Ice, you tap a creature, you draw a card. So both are pretty good effects for low mana cost. It's not a bad spell. There's Aether Mutation. When you played this, you return target creature to its owner's hand, and then you put X 1/1 green sapling creature tokens in play, where X was that creature's converted mana cost. There were some combos with things like Verdaloth, where I played out Verdaloth with a lot of kicker, got a bunch of saplings, Aether mutated him back to my hand, got more saplings, played him again with the kicker for more saplings. You see the cycle here that I played with. Cough, cough, confession. Coalition Flag. You made anything into a flag bearer. I talked about what flag bearing was before, that it has to be targeted first. If your opponent can target it, you could make anything into a flag bearer with Coalition Flag. There was Chromat. It was a 5/5 legend. He's interesting because he's 5 colors, and for paying mana of pairs of colors, you have various effects on Chromat. So it was interesting with a lot of different effects you could effectively give him. Death Grasp. You dealt X damage to target creature or player and gained X life. It's a pretty good white-black one. Dragon Arch. This artifact's pretty powerful in a multicolored deck. Once you get it out, for 2 mana and tap it, you can put a multicolored creature spell from your hand into play. So effectively, it can make it that you get some powerful multicolored legends out for 2 mana. Fervent Charge. When a creature you control attacks, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Not a very bad spell, and I did play with it myself. Gerald Caption. He's got a number of effects. First off, at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life for each card in target opponent's hand. So you target an opponent, you gain a life for each card they have in their hand at the beginning of your upkeep. Then, when Gerald attacks, for 3 colorless and 1 white, you can tap a creature an opponent controls. Again, it has to be when he's attacking. That's the caveat for this ability. That's the only time it's useful. He's not bad in a straight white deck. Index. For 1 blue, you look at the top 5 cards of your library and put them back in any order. You index the top of your library. It's pretty good. Jungle Barrier is a 2/6 wall. When it comes into play, you draw the card. Not bad for a green-blue deck. Last Stand. Last Stand has an effect for each amount of basic lands you have. So you get an effect for each swamp you have, for mountains, for forests, for islands, for plains. And the effect is based on the number of each of those you have. It's your last stand that you get. You cause damage, you gain life, you draw cards, you saplings. You do all these various things with the last stand. Legacy Weapon. This one, when it would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, instead you shuffle it into your library. So unless you're exiling Legacy Weapon, it doesn't go away. Not forever. For 1 of each color mana, all 5 mana, you exile target permanent. Legacy Weapon is powerful. Phyrexian Arena. An enchantment does the siphon effect. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and you draw 1 card. If you make a black-white life-gaining deck, it's really good in there. Quicksilver Dagger. It's an enchant creature. Enchanted creature has tap. It can deal 1 damage to target player. You draw a card. Pretty good, so you can sort of pink away at your enemy while drawing cards. Spectral Lynx. One of my favorites from white during the time. It's a 2/1 that has protection from green, and for a black mana regenerates. It's actually pretty good for the little rare and white-black, for a little kind of small, weenie creature. Symbiotic Deployment. You skip your draw step, but for 1 mana and tapping 2 creatures you control, you draw a card. So as long as you have a lot of creatures and a bunch of mana, you can draw a lot of cards. Urborg Elf. He can tap for a green, a blue, or a black. So it's an elf that, rather than just tapping for green, could tap for 1 of 3 colors. Pretty good if you're having a deck that maybe have even 2 of those colors combined. Yavameya's Embrace. You gain control of target creature. It gains +2/+2 and trample. A green-blue creature stealing card that also makes it much bigger and trample heavy. Pretty good if you're stealing something that normally would benefit from trample. So that's it for today. I talked about Apocalypse, the last set in the invasion block. A transition time for both myself and Magic. I have to confess that after this period in time, I stopped majorly collecting Magic for many years, grabbing packs here and there. When it came to the next set, Odyssey, I didn't dive into it. I felt the Apocalypse was the end for me, not until Scars at least. But when we talk about the set and the history of it, we move in towards the final blocks, the final storylines, leading up to Modern, and a different take on it. We see that there are only 3 more storylines that really revolve around Dominaria that existed during this time, and 2 of them are directly related to each other, with the next 2 blocks, starting with the Odyssey block, being direct sequel storylines. directly connected to each other, almost in transition between the two of them that is almost one block altogether with all 6 sets. And it leads into modern. This saw an evolution of multicolor. We saw the inclusion of enemy colors going against each other, which they sort of had done by now, but never to this degree. And we saw evolutions of many of the abilities that had been reflected upon the cards within the block. So Apocalypse itself was the ultimate end game of this. But it was also this end game of this major storyline. The storyline of Weatherlight, of Urza, of the Phyrexian invasion. People saw this as the end of Magic, like myself. That is why it's such an interesting set to see that it wasn't a ending. It was a new life for Magic. A new step in the journey of it. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, go check out my Patreon. Link in the description below. If you want to see some other people that do some great Magic content, I can recommend Card Bazaar, They Said, We Said, and Tasty Snackies. They are my friends in the multiverse. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.